Hey, Steve, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, Jay, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I'm really excited to have you because you have a long history in business. You've done all kinds of different things. You're a best-selling author. You've published hundreds of articles, and I think you're going to have a lot of insights for folks out there who are trying to grow a business. Your kind of self-proclaimed title, or at least website title, is the Unstoppable CEO. What does that mean?
Well, so it's important to note that that is not my title, because I think that'd be pretty arrogant if I gave myself that title. But I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine, and it was early on after I'd started this business back in 2010. And he was asking me, like, who do you want to really serve? And the person that I had in mind was the small business owner, the CEO that I had known in my first business. So my first business was an engineering company that had been around for about 25 years. And so I had all these contacts with all these business owners who had been in business for a while. And, we got talking about, who they were and all that. And I said, the guys that, that they just they're pretty successful, but it's been a challenge. Like, they've just slogged through. They've been through recessions, and they've been through, business divorces, and they've been through all these challenges over time. And he looked at me and said, "Oh, you mean so they're unstoppable?" And I was like, "Well, we have our word, we got our name." And so that's who we serve. That's really kind of an aspirational thing. When we look at working with a business owner, that's one of the qualities that they've got to have if we want to work with them, because that gets us really excited about being in a relationship with them and collaborating with them.
I love that idea. I mean, I think, what people always ask, what are the key attributes of leadership, questions like that. And I think one of them is persistence, especially if you're going to last in business for a long time, and Unstoppable kind of aligns with that. You said that you had been in the engineering business for 25 years. That's a long career in one industry and a long track record. What made you change gears and say, all right, well, now I want to do something a little bit different?
Well, so I had been in that business for about 12 years. The business had been in existence for about 12 or 13 years before that. And when I came in, I was fresh out of college and wet behind the ears still. But when I came into the business, I didn't know it at the time, but the founder kind of had this intention that he was looking for a successor, and he was kind of forward thinking. He was still fairly young at the time. And I was that guy, and I didn't know it until about 4 years later when he asked me to take over. And then I ran the business for another decade. And, and it was great. It was a wonderful business, enjoyed it. We had two real problems with that business, and I didn't really understand them until a particular day in 2009. And our problems were that about 50% of our business came from land development work in Southeast Florida, and so all real estate. And then the other 50% came from government agencies. And I didn't really think about the government agencies. They were always sort of our hedge against a big downturn in the economy, because we thought, well, their funding isn't going to go away. But all the projects we worked on were funded by the bond market. And I'll never forget the day that the bond market just totally imploded in 2009. We were actually moving into a new office. I was, getting all of that organized and working through it that day. And it was a couple of days before I really realized what that was going to mean. But for our government contracts, it meant that the agencies that we worked with and we worked for the state of Florida, they couldn't, even though they had great credit, they couldn't go out and get any money to fund the project. So all of a sudden, in about a 6-month period of time, we lost about 90% of our business. And biggest challenge I've ever been in business. And we were faced with a decision. Were we going to continue and throw money into the hole, because it was going to be a big hole and probably a decades-long hole, which is about what it turned out to be? Or do we, go kind of in different directions and take the money that we made and restart? And I took that option, and really decided that the thing that I love to do is work with other professionals in service businesses who are selling at, a really high ticket, and help them kind of figure out this whole sales and marketing problem, because it's a big problem for them.
Yeah, a lot of people struggle with sales and marketing. I always say marketing can be confusing and expensive. It seems like it should be easier than ever to get attention and acquire customers. But the problem is that there's so many options. A lot of people just take this shotgun approach and start firing things against the wall. And usually that's not very successful. And then they'll say things like, well, this doesn't work. This tool over here doesn't work, or this pathway doesn't work. And I'm like, yeah, but that's like me saying like a backhoe doesn't work to dig a pool because I tried it and it didn't work, but I don't know how to drive the backhoe, you know?
Right.
So I'm curious from your perspective, like what are some of the tools, just real tactically, speaking into other business owners that you've found that have been really successful for those people trying to, grow their businesses?
Well, I always try and really reverse engineer what you want to accomplish, and then simplify it down. Because one of the things that we found when we're working with real world business owners that aren't internet marketers, or they're not professional marketers and don't want to be, that they've got a lot of other demands on their time, and so you've got to get this simplified down to the point where they can actually operate it. Otherwise, what's the point of the system? And
Mm-hmm.
so we have found a couple of tools that work pretty effectively for that. The most important one is a podcast. And so one of the things that we really advocate to our clients is that they have a podcast. And the reason we like that as a tool is because it allows them in a very short amount of time commitment for the business owner, maybe 4 to 6 hours a month. It allows them to get the vast majority of their business development work done. And it's already using a skill that they know how to use. They already know how to have a conversation with another human being. We tried other ways of getting them to do it. We've tried content marketing. We tried to get them to write things. We've tried all sorts of stuff. And what we found is that it's really difficult to change people's habits. But if you can give them a system where all they've got to do is show up, and you're going to guarantee that they're going to show up because they've got an appointment scheduled with a guest that's going to be on their podcast, right? So there's that built-in accountability. They're never going to put that off because it would damage their reputation. And then at the end of that conversation, they've got a team in place that takes care of everything else, so they don't have to do anything. We have found that to be kind of the winning formula. And so we can get into, if you want to get tactically into all the different ways that we take that little time investment and repurpose it, and the reasons we do that, we can certainly get into that. But that's what we found is one of the primary tools that we use, and one of the easiest to get success with for our clients.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think it's one of those things. I mean, that's what I'm doing on this show, essentially. Like, I think a lot of times people think, well, I can't have a podcast because I don't have any content for it. And I always tell them, like, look, the best way to have a podcast is just have a conversation. Get somebody else on the show that has interesting ideas that you want to talk to and talk about. And it's been amazing to me, some of the opportunities I've had and just conversations that I've had just because I have this show. And I think some people get so caught up in like the metrics of it, of like how many people are watching the show or listening to the show, I should say, if it's podcast. And what I said from the very beginning was, if I have the opportunity, number one, just to talk to another business owner who's built a successful business, that's a benefit for me. So selfishly, for my own education's sake, the fact that every single week or every other week at least, I'm talking to somebody else who's had decades of experience in business, that's a real big pro for me. And even though I've been in business for several decades too, you can always learn from somebody else. That's a big thing for me, is trying to learn from somebody else. So that idea of just having a conversation with somebody, especially if they're an ideal prospect, is huge. So give me some examples of like maybe different industries or different types of people that you've worked with that have been able to make this work. Because I think some people out there might be thinking, well, I'm not sure how that would work for my industry, and I think it could actually work for most people. So what's an ideal fit for somebody that goes, hey, maybe podcasts and this type of marketing might work for me?
Well, to me, the low-hanging fruit type of business for a podcast, who the business that can make this work really, really easily, is the one that is selling a product or service that is pretty expensive.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the first year that a client works with you, they're going to be spending thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of dollars with you. And it's not that they don't work in other situations. It's just that you need a much bigger audience to make it work in those situations. And as I'm sure you know, Jay, it's tough to build a big listenership in a podcast, and it's kind of tough to move those people, from listening into taking action. We can talk about how it fits in your conversion process in a minute, but so that's really who we kind of focus on: people who are selling something fairly expensive. So a really great example of that is an accountant that is a client of ours. He's got a virtual CFO business, and he came to us, and he had basically just a local kind of practice. He'd been going to BNI and some other local like chamber networking events and doing that for several years, and been fairly successful at it, and had a little bit of a book of business, but it was taking a ton of time. And he felt like he wasn't getting the payoff for the amount of time investment that it was requiring. And he wanted to be able to grow the business beyond his local area, because he can work with people anywhere. He didn't need to have them be local. And obviously networking in all sorts of different cities becomes pretty problematic if you're a small business like that. And so he actually was a guest on our podcast. And we got to talking at the end of that interview about what we did. And he's like, hey, I might be really interested in that. So we had a conversation. He came on, and the first thing that we did is we looked at, well, who are your existing contacts? And we kind of mapped out the list of people that he knew. And when we did that, we noticed that there were some people that had pretty good networks of potential clients for him. And so we positioned that podcast to go and be attractive to those people to be interviewed. And then we reach out for him to get him booked as guests. And part of what our strategy is, once you build the relationship through the interview, the purpose of the podcast is really to have a conversation like this, where you're highlighting somebody else's expertise. Mm-hmm. They're going to feel really good about that, and feel really good about you, because you're giving them a platform to talk all about themselves and their business. And then at the end of that conversation, the recording stops. You've got the opportunity to engage them further. And what we tell our clients to do is, look, all you've got to do is figure out, where are they going? What are their goals? And then that will tell you how you can kind of plug in and add value. And so, he did that. He had that conversation. And then what we had him do is offer an opportunity to help that person give value into their network by having him come in and give a talk on, how to increase the profitability in your business. Well, for these business owners who all had lots of business owners as clients, that was a really attractive thing. Most of them weren't doing a whole lot to nurture the relationship with their network. And this was a way to be a real hero to all the people in their network, kind of be the impresario, where they're bringing an expert in, and he was the expert. And so he did, out of the first 9 interviews he did, 7 people agreed to have him come to a presentation. He generated about 250 leads, which was a ton for him. And he closed out of that 8 clients within about a 2-month period, which he said was his best 2 months since he started the business. And now he's got all the rest of those 250 leads that are going to continue to hear from him, because every time he records a podcast interview, our team takes that, we put it in his email marketing and in his social media, and it goes out to all of those people. And so he's little by little creating relationship with those people, because they're hearing his voice. They're hearing him kind of talk to another business owner. They're getting to experience what it would be like to be in conversation with him. So it's a powerful, powerful strategy.
Yeah, I just love this idea. I think the whole concept of even perceived authority in some of these scenarios, where because you have a show, if you will, or because you have a podcast, that has value. And the reality is, most people have no way of knowing how much viewership you get on your podcast or anything else anyway. And I think for me, it's that reality of, there's so much opportunity in just building that relationship. And if you're doing it with somebody who's a prospective client, I think this kind of flips the idea of a podcast on its head, because a lot of people, I think, start a podcast and think, I'm going to have this awesome show, and then I'm going to get sponsors, and the sponsors are going to pay me, and all this kind of stuff. Maybe that'll happen, but that's a lot harder road to really grow successfully, where if you already have an established business and you're able to build a place where you can essentially set up a conversation that is going to benefit the other person because you're exposing them and their business and telling their story and everything else. Um, it's just absolutely huge. I want to circle back a little bit because one of the things that you talked about that I think is really important is you were talking about giving them a system and then having a team in place to help take care of those, take care of them and the podcast. Because I think something like a podcast is one of those things somebody might start and maybe they read a couple articles and they buy a microphone and they get plugged in, they do a little bit of work, and then they realize there actually is a lot more to running a successful podcast than just recording the episode. But what you're talking about is putting together a way that they can show up at a microphone, have a conversation, and that's it. Talk about the power of having a good system and the right team in place, whether it's an in-house team or, in your case, an out-of-house team that you're hiring to do things. That power of team and system together is really something big.
It's huge. Well, and I'm guilty of doing exactly what you described. So in 2012, I started my first podcast. We were sort of on the early end of podcasting, and we did it for a year. I did 52 episodes, one a week. I interviewed experts all over the world, built great relationships through it. And we were executing the strategy at that time, and it worked really, really well. I got opportunities to present to their networks, to their audiences. We got a lot of business out of that. I got really busy, and I didn't have a team who could do this. Mm-hmm. And so it ended at the end of that year because I got too busy. It took me a little while to really learn that lesson because, I went just to show you the value of those kinds of relationships. 2 years after that podcast ended, I wrote a book, my first book called Unstoppable Referrals. I went back to the 50 people that I'd interviewed, and out of the 50, 15, so a small number of them said, yeah, I'd love to help you promote the book, and they shared it. And those relationships that people I'd stayed in touch with for those couple of years, those relationships basically put our business on the map. Mm. We had a tiny little following of about 1,000 people in our database before the book. These 15 people helped me promote the book, and we had 5,268 copies of the book leave Amazon the first week. 5 times the number of people who had ever been exposed to us before. That's the power of building some of these relationships. Now, when I started our current podcast a couple of years ago and really started to double down on this, I actually delayed for about 6 months because I knew that if I had started it and tried to do it all myself, it was just going to fail again. And it was going to fail faster because I didn't have as much time. And so I spent about 6 months building the team and thinking about the systems and getting all of that in place before we launched. And then we launched, and now we've been going, we're entering our 4th year this month of the podcast. We're somewhere in the ballpark of 160, 170 episodes completed. I could not have done that without the team that we have. They're phenomenal. And without the systems in place so that I can just show up and talk. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of our goal for our clients. If they can just show up and talk, they're the talent. And they need to act like the talent. And too many business owners, especially small business owners, think they have to do it all themselves. And they don't invest to go get the team and the systems. And you can get the team and systems a lot of different ways. You can buy somebody's system through a course or a book and then hire the team to implement that. That's a totally great way to do it. You can go out and you can hire a company like ours, which has got the systems and the team packaged for you. There's lots of ways to do it. And I'll never tell anyone there's one right way. It's whatever way gets it done for you is the right way. But those two things together put you as the business owner in position to make this sustainable. And I think that's really the critical thing. Jay, at the beginning, you talked about folks that try all these different tools and, they don't get very far with it. We call those dabblers. Mm. That's our kind of lingo for them. And we see them try something and then, they'll see some ad on Facebook for something else and they'll jump to that and they'll dabble in this and that and the other thing. And I don't think you can build a business that lasts by dabbling. So, having been a part of a business that was around for 25 years and grown it. And then now having my second business that's we're in our 10th year right now. And the thing that I really focus on are what are the few things I can do that aren't going to change over time, because that really simplifies things for me. And, this podcasting thing sounds like it's all new, but we actually did this in my first business in kind of a ghetto podcast, because podcasts didn't exist, but we would interview people that we wanted to be in a relationship with. We would record those. It was really complicated at the time. We'd record them. We'd put them on CD. We would mail them in the USPS out to our network. That was a pain in the rear.
Yeah.
So it's all gotten a lot easier, but the strategy was the same. I'm using this interview to get in relationship with somebody that's strategically important to me, either a prospect or a center of influence that can refer me. And I'm using that as the door opener, because I can kind of parachute over the walls for the prospect. I get past all the gatekeepers, because if I go to a business owner that I want to do business with and try and sell them something, then I'm showing up as a salesperson. I don't want to do that. I want to show up as their friend, as their trusted advisor, as the expert that they turn to as an authority. And the podcast allows me to do that.
Yeah. I think all of this is really important. I want people to think about it. They're listening, not just from the podcast standpoint, but really business as a whole. Because there's so many times I think that business owners get stuck in the trap of doing it all themselves. And, I'm of that personality too. You talked about dabblers. I call it sometimes SOS, as shiny object syndrome. And I can be guilty of that for sure. It's in my personality and my nature. But like when I started this podcast, for example, when I started it, I'm the kind of person that wanted to kind of do it all myself to kind of get a feel for it. But I knew very quickly that there was no way that I could do that all the time, as far as sending out reminders and setting up the actual Zoom call, and then actually recording it and saving it and editing it and creating like all the stuff that has to be done for a podcast. There's a lot of pieces to that puzzle, and you don't realize it until you get into it. And now it's gotten to a point where I show up, I have this conversation, and then that's it. Like I have a team in place that takes care of all those other pieces. But that's true for so many parts of business. One concept that I don't know if you've ever heard this before, I don't remember where I stole it from, but it's probably not mine. I love this idea of when you're trying to figure out if you should do it or not. The question is, one, does it need to be done? And if not, delete it. Number two, can I automate it? Because there's some pieces like sending out a meeting reminder of, hey, Steve, we've got a podcast tomorrow. Hey, Steve, we've got a podcast in an hour. That's going to greatly increase the number of people that actually show up for the show. And that can all be done by robots. I don't need people to even do that. Number three, can I delegate it? Is there somebody else, an outside team like yours that I can hand it off to, an inside person or a contractor? There's lots of different options, as you said. I always tell people, ignore the system, but have a system. You've got to have a way that works for you. And just because, you, Steve, do it a certain way and I do it a different way, neither one of those is necessarily wrong, unless I'm completely worn out, stressed out, and ready to quit. Then I am doing something wrong and I have to fix it. So I just love these ideas that you're sharing with regards to creating sustainability, and the fact that you've been in business now for 10 years and grown that over time has real impact. I'd love to hear, thinking about those relationships. You talked about having a network of 1,000 people, and then when that book got released, literally 5xing the sale number, which means really based off of that, the network of people that, because the network of people that it got expanded to was exponentially larger than that, because they're not all going to buy. We know that conversion rates, regardless of, can be pretty low. So that means you added multiple zeros to the number of people that actually got exposure. So how did you leverage that network of connections well without them feeling like you were using them because you had them on your show one time? What are some of your strategies around, kind of developing and nurturing those relationships well and not using people, if you will?
Well, it's like any human relationship. Okay. You have to actually care about the other person. It seems so obvious, but a lot of times we get kind of caught up in our underwear around, what we want out of it. And that's generally counterproductive. I've never failed to find the opportunity to ask for what I wanted, but I had to create the conditions where that ask was going to be, positively received. And so part of that's just being a good friend. I mean, it's not any more complicated than that. So, when I meet somebody, I always ask questions, I'm sure we'll have this conversation at the end of the podcast here once we turn the recording off. I want to know about I'm truly curious, Jay, what are you up to? What are your goals? One of the great things about having the podcast I have is I've interviewed, over 100 entrepreneurs, and they all are doing really amazing things. And I'm at the point now, and I actually got there very quickly with the podcast, and I'm sure you can relate to this, where I'll hear, you may tell me an idea today, and I go, oh, you really need to know so-and-so. Do you know them? And you'll say, no, I don't know them. Well, let me get you connected. And so just being curious about where somebody's going allows you to leverage all the other relationships that you have. People are always looking for a connection that can move them forward towards their goal. They're always looking for ideas that can help move them forward towards their goal. Okay. And so, you may have an idea that would help somebody, and I'll just shoot somebody an email. Hey, I was thinking about what you told me last month, and have you thought about this? And it doesn't matter if they have or if they haven't. It's the fact that you thought about them, you cared enough to give them some of your attention when you weren't in front of them, and then you were thoughtful enough to send them, that little thing, that little email. So I do that. One of the other practices that I have is that every day I send out a card. I've got a stack of, here on my desk, a stack of note cards and envelopes, and I get these things printed up just with my name on it and my return address, so I don't have to do any work other than address the thing and write a note. And sometimes it's just as simple as, hey, Jay, was thinking about you today. Hope you're doing really well. Let's get together soon, Steve. People go to all this trouble to clip out articles and do all this crazy stuff. I used to do that too, to try and add value. And sometimes you don't even need to do all that. You just need to show up and show that you care. So that's, I think, the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you're going to show up and ask somebody to do something, you've got to ask them to do something that's aligned with their own interests. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things I discovered as I was putting together the Unstoppable Referrals book. It's it's the number one barrier that keeps people from getting referrals, is you're asking somebody for a referral, but you're asking them to do something that's not in their interest. Mm-hmm. Because if they refer you, it's not that they don't want to help you, but it's almost all risk to them. And it's, almost all the benefit goes to you. There's very little benefit for them. But if you change it up a little bit and you align your interest with their interest, now all of a sudden you unlock that. Well, if you approach that with anything that you're asking for of your relationships, it just works so much better. So with the book, I was able to go out to those people and say, hey, I've got this book, can I send you a pre-release copy? And I did that, and they got it. And there happened to be some ideas that they thought were powerful in there. And it helps to have good ideas. I'm a big believer that ideas should do the selling for you. And then I came back and said, well, great, I'm glad you like it. Would you be willing to share it with everybody when we launch? Share it with all the folks And they go, oh yeah, this would be great. My network would love this. Okay, so I was giving them the opportunity to be a hero to their network by being the one who connected all of the people that are in their network with a valuable resource.
Yeah, I think those two things are really big. The idea of actually caring for somebody and then aligning with their interests. I was always told a long time ago, when it comes to selling is not hard. It's just a matter of helping somebody else. And if you honestly believe that your product or service is going to help them in the end, I always say you're almost morally obligated to convince them to buy it, because you really are trying to help them. Like, you actually do care. And the only reason sales gets a bad rap is because there's salespeople out there that are selling things that are not actually in people's best interests. But if what we're selling, we believe is going to help them, I mean, gosh, it's a no-brainer. And I love that idea of thinking about that individual and aligning it with their interest. Also, something as simple as sending out a physical card in the mail seems so, I don't know, old school, but I think that makes it even more valuable today. I mean, how many of us do we get bombarded with LinkedIn message requests and emails and everything else? And it's so easy to delete those. But if I get a physical piece of mail in my office and it has my name on the front of it, that piece of mail is going to go on my desk. because nobody else is going to open it because it just has my name on it. And so like that if it looks like a personal note and it looks like it's a personal letter and it looks like it, that's going to come to me, and I'm going to open it. I'm going to see it. And even if I just see your name and I don't do anything else with it, I don't reply to it, I don't email you back, I take it and toss it straight in the trash can. That is a serious, like, physical connection. And I think we undervalue that culturally right now. And it's a huge opportunity for people to literally just write a card and send it to somebody and say, hey, I really appreciate the time we got to talk last week, or whatever, and actually,
Yeah.
I think that matters too.
Yeah. It's super easy to do. It takes me less than 5 minutes a day. And, and I don't do it on the weekends. So, I get 210 or 15 cards out a year. And, that so far in my business career, that's been enough.
Mm-hmm.
Nurturing those relationships over time has been enough to drive the business forward and open up other opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I'd like to transition just a little bit to final things I always like to hit on before we wrap up the show. One is the question of work-life balance, and the second is kind of any parting thoughts you have for people who want to build a business that lasts. I said there's two, it's actually going to be three. And the third is where people can find you online. So let's start with the first one. That is the question of work-life balance. I know I am a recovering workaholic. Sometimes I'm still in the middle of it because I love the work that I get to do. But I also have a bunch of kids and wife and all kind of other stuff and friends I'd like to keep friends. And I think as entrepreneurs, we all struggle with this because most people who are in business for themselves, hopefully, actually like doing the work that they're doing. And if they don't, they probably should go do something else. And over the years, I know for me, the seasons of life change that. But what does, number one, work-life balance even mean to you? It means something different to everybody, I think. And then two, how has that changed throughout your life and career?
Yeah, it's funny, that phrase has become such almost like a charged phrase over the last decade. And I don't, sometimes I wonder, I've had these conversations with entrepreneurial friends of mine, does it even mean anything anymore? Because one of the things that I found is that I'm almost always out of balance one way or another, So I go through these periods of time where, where work is needing to take priority and it's sort of eating more time. Now I do have some limits that I put on that every week, but then there are other periods of time where, family and other things kind of lead the way. And, and so I've never tried to get it like in balance where week to week, I'm perfectly balanced. It's always sort of thinking, over the course of a quarter or a year, am I kind of balancing things out, and have I set real specific goals in all the areas of my life, and am I moving towards those? Because I find that that's kind of what helps me move forward. So like for this year, one of my goals is to cut my work week down to actually just be Monday through Thursday. And I'm doing that for two reasons. One, I believe it's going to really increase productivity because, work expands to the time you allot it. So if it's got less time, I'll probably get more done.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to have Fridays for a combination of free days where it's totally free. Those days where I can either go play golf, hang out with friends. My wife and I had one day back in November of last year where we both happened to be off because she's got a pretty intense job as well. We both happened to be off. We went to this local brewery here in town. It was kind of rainy and misty and a cold, unusually cold November day here in Florida. And we just sat there and we drank probably too much beer and we ate too much food and we talked for like 8 hours straight. I mean, there wasn't a break, and it was one of the best days I've ever had with my wife in our entire marriage. And I knew at that moment I got to figure out how do I create more of those, because it was awesome. And how do I create them with our kids? And how do I create those with my friends? And the other thing that I found is that because I started experimenting with this, over the last several months, where I could fit it into the already packed schedule, that when I'm taking that time off, the business actually benefits dramatically
Mm-hmm.
because I come back fresh and I got like all this creativity is unleashed in that time off. And so it's been really interesting to see that. So that's how I do it. I set these goals and say, okay, well, now I got something to track towards that will create the balance for me.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think the idea of setting goals across all areas of life is something that can be a little bit of a pain point for a lot of entrepreneurs. They think, well, I've got business goals. I don't really have like family goals. I don't really have marriage goals. I don't have friend goals. I don't have spirituality goals. I don't have health goals, other than like I need to still lose that same 15 pounds. And so I think that idea is really important because it's a gauge where you can go, all right, I'm a quarter into the year. Am I moving towards that goal or am I moving away from it? And what do I need to do in order to move towards it? And I totally agree with you that sometimes those days off, I think people think I can't afford to take a day off. I've got too much work to do. Well, one, that's a good problem to have if you're really that busy. But number two, if we don't take those days, I have found it only creates pain. It is much better at least to have some sprinkling of those days where there's nothing scheduled, there's nothing planned, because I think our brains need that freedom to roam and turn our phones off and turn our laptops off because sometimes that actually is the best thing for business too, which is kind of seems counterintuitive, but it's true. It's why people come up with their best ideas when they're in the car or in the shower because their brains have freedom to roam. Although now
Absolutely.
people are on their phones in the car too. So.
Well, I'll tell you one key thing there, because the block that people run into with how to create some of that balance when they're too busy at work is that they think, well, how do I get out from under this? And I was right in the middle of that last year. We grew a bunch towards the end of 2018 and going into 2019, and I had to do two things. Going back to your comment on systems and team, I had to add somebody to my team who could act as kind of an operations manager. And then I had to work with that person for about 3 or 4 months of pretty heavy lifting to get systems really well documented and get everybody trained up on them. And then once I did that, it was like amazing how much time that freed to be able to go and do other things, both in the business and out of the business. And so unfortunately, that's where, I said earlier, things kind of swing out of balance sometimes. Sometimes you need to swing it out of balance so that you can kind of, push that rock over the hill and be okay with that, And so when I was going through that, I had the conversation with my wife. It's like, hey, I've got to really get this done over the next 3 or 4 months. And once it's done, it's going to be really great. And got her to buy into that.
But see, that's key right there. The fact that you kind of told her, hey, look, I got this thing I got to work on. I got this season. It's going to be about this long. That's communicating up front. The mistake I think a lot of us make, I know I've made over time, is not communicating that, entering into that season and not being able to get it done. I also think just right now, I've been saying this a lot lately, culturally, we love extremes as a society, it seems lately. And as a result, one of those in business is the hustle 24/7 lifestyle and the extreme self-care lifestyle. And both of them seem to want to shame people into some particular scenario. The hustle lifestyle, if you're not working still at 2:00 in the morning and you don't have your laptop open and you're not responding to texts every 15 seconds, then you're not working hard enough. And the other lifestyle says, if you're not taking a nap every day and you don't have yoga at least 4 times a week and you're not drinking green smoothies at least 3 times a day, then you're not taking care of yourself. And I think so often the truth is somewhere in the middle. And sometimes we pivot this way and we got to just really put the pedal to the metal. And sometimes we pivot this way and we go, hey, I need a little extra rest. And I think having people around you to kind of hold you accountable in that has real value.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So 2 final things, parting thoughts. So when you think about talking directly to an entrepreneur, a business owner, or even an executive who is trying to build a business that lasts, what is that kind of parting idea that you would want to leave with them?
It can't be all about you. You can't do it as a lone ranger. And, one of the things that has really cropped up over the last decade is this, the idea of the millionaire solopreneur. And it's not that they don't happen, but I know actually a lot of people who put themselves out there publicly as the millionaire solopreneur. And the truth is they got a pretty big team. They might not be employees, but they got a pretty big team supporting them. And, I think I see this trap a lot where, business owners, as they're kind of starting in the first 5 years of the business, they really hesitate to invest in getting help when they need it. And I think that's the most valuable investment that you can make. And I got this in my first business. I had a mentor who happened to be at one point the CEO of the Boston Whaler Boat Company. And he said the best advice he ever got from one of his mentors was that anytime you feel like your schedule is too full, then you need to take a pay cut and hire an assistant. Mm-hmm. And he said every time he did it, within about a year, he had doubled his income. Mm-hmm. And I started doing that in my first business. So in my first business, we had 3 offices and I had 2 full-time assistants, one in each of our 2 bigger offices where I spent most of the time, and I travel back and forth. And it was just a boon for productivity, which meant I could focus on the stuff that actually made money. So we made more money. And then in this business, within the first year, I hired my first assistant, and having that person, and now I've got a couple of people that just focus on supporting me. That's transformational. And in today's economy, I mean, with all the VAs and all the opportunities to get part of a person's time, there's no reason not to do it. So I think getting that team in place early, and then thinking strategically as you grow, how do I build a really great team around me? Because your job is to be the CEO, not to be everything. And you can't be the CEO if you're doing all these other roles. Yeah, and I think that's how you build a business that lasts.
Absolutely. I think that is absolutely critical. And it's so easy sometimes to feel like, especially if you have a team of employees already, to bring an assistant on to help you personally. I think some people see that as like, I don't know. I've actually felt like this before, where I'm like, well, it's kind of selfish for me to have this extra helper and all this kind of stuff. It's just for me. But it's not. It's in everybody's best interest, because so many times it's easy to get strung up in the things that really are just not the best use of your time. And when you think about what your time should be valued at and the work that you're doing, sometimes it just doesn't make any sense. So I think that's really good counsel to realize that it's just not all about you, and you need to put the right people in place. And those might be an internal team, it might be an external team, it might be contractors, or it might be even outsourcing to companies like yours. So speaking of that, where can people find you if they want to learn more about this idea of running their own podcast? They want to really kind of dig into this concept of being an unstoppable CEO. Maybe that's an aspirational identity for them. Where can they find you? Where can they get some more information and get educated?
Well, Jay, thanks. I actually wrote a book that kind of describes how a podcast fits into your marketing. And what we've done is we've set up a page just for your listeners. So if they go to unstoppableceo.net/build, they can go there. They can get a copy of the book. It's called The Exponential Network Strategy, and then get the book for free. It's in downloadable form and audio book, and it tells them all the different things they need to think about to get a podcast started. So whether you want to start it, yourself with your internal team, or work with someone else, or you're just curious about, how it could work in your business to help you attract new clients and build the strategic relationships that you need, it'll lay all of that out.
That sounds like a great resource. So unstoppableceo.net/build. Is that right?
That's it.
All right. Unstoppableceo.net/build. I'll put the link in the show notes as well. Steve, thanks so much for being on the show today. I think a lot of these ideas are going to be really helpful for aspiring entrepreneurs, current entrepreneurs, and business builders all over the place who are working really hard to build a business that lasts. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jay. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there, where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.